May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. So in 1949, there was this woman, Joanne Robinson, and she recently moved from Texas to Montgomery, Alabama, where she took a job teaching English at a historically black college. She was an African-American English professor. And in 1949 in Montgomery, she got on the bus. And she saw that all the seats for people that looked like her were taken. All the seats for people that looked like me were empty. And she wanted to sit down. And so she sat in one of those seats meant for people like me. Bus driver stopped the bus, called her out, verbally accosted her, was in her face yelling, just irate. And in order to not cause a scene and let these other folks get on their way, she just said, "Let me off the bus." And so she got off the bus, and she went home that night, and she started to call other folks. She was part of a group called the Women's Political Committee in Montgomery. And so she started to call some of her cohort there. She went to leadership in the city, and she went to other civil rights leaders of the day, and she was like, "We got to figure out something to do. This isn't right." And so in 1949, she wanted to start a bus boycott, but she was told by leaders of the civil rights movement, the WPC and others, no. She was told to wait and accept this, quote, as the way of life in Montgomery. And so she waited. And she waited. In our gospel story today, we have the story of two folks who waited for a long time as well. First, we have Simeon. And Simeon is, we don't know what he was. He was a guy who served at the temple, and he was waiting there because he was promised that he would not die until he saw the Messiah come in. And so day after day, year after year, decade after decade, according to tradition, century after century, Simeon showed up and was ready, and he waited. Simeon's story is crazy. Legend has it. We don't know this. It's not written down anywhere. But legend has it is he was one of the scholars that translated the Hebrew scriptures into the Septuagint, which is the Greek version that was carried on. And legend has it that he mistranslated a verse of Isaiah, and that's why he was told, as punishment maybe, he would not die until he saw this thing happen. Legend has that he lived over 300 years waiting for this. That's a heck of a typo in your translation if you have to wait 300 years. But day after day, week after week, year after year, decade after decade, century after century, Simeon showed up, did his job, served God, and waited. And then we have Anna. Anna we know is a prophetess. We have her job title. That's someone who served in the temple. She prayed and she fasted every day. That was her job, to pray and to fast. And here we actually, speaking of translations, we have some disagreement between the early texts. What we read today says she was a widow until she was 84. And so we can imagine this 84-year-old woman who'd been serving in the temple. Some other manuscripts back in the day say she was a widow for 84 years, which if she was maybe married at 13, married for 7 years, maybe she's 104 years old. But day after day, week after week, year after year, decade after decade, Anna showed up. She prayed. She fasted. She did her job. And she waited. And what we learn from both Simeon and Anna is that God's promise does not come with a timeline. We know God's promise is true. We know God will make all things right. We know that God will move and show up. But sometimes we feel like we're waiting a really long time for that to happen. In those intervening years in which she waited, she did not just sit on her hands. She did not just twiddle her thumb. She did not just go home and wait for something else to happen. She took a leadership position in the WPC. She met with leaders of the civil rights movement, leaders of the city, all races. She built coalitions of folks who could work toward that moment when God would show up. And so then on December 1st, 1955, more than 5 years after Joanne was told to wait, on December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks was arrested. And that night, Joanne and her team printed and distributed 35,000 pamphlets. And the next day, the Montgomery boycott began. Joanne was told to wait, but she knew that type of waiting was a time to get to work, because she didn't know when it would be, but she knew there would be a day of action. She knew that there would be a day when God would show up. And so day after day, week after week, year after year, Joanne got to work, she got ready, and she waited. Just like Simeon, just like Anna, just like y'all over here. What is y'all's motto? Be prepared. You as scouts, y'all learn all sorts of crazy things. I was a scout leader for a while. You learn how to make fire. Maybe in your whole life, you may never need to make fire, right? You need first aid. Hopefully in your life, you never need first aid. You learn how to do all sorts of things. You may never need to do it. But you show up, you learn, you practice, and you wait. Because one day you might. And on that day, you need to be prepared. Simeon showed up every day. Anna showed up every day. Joanne showed up every day. They prayed, they studied, they served, they practiced, so that the day they were needed to act, they could be prepared. And it's the same for us. We're all waiting for different things. Maybe we're waiting days, maybe we're waiting weeks, maybe we're waiting years. Hopefully none of us are waiting centuries, but maybe, right? We have precedents for that. We're all waiting for something, and some of that waiting is good, right? We think now is the time, I just need one more thing to fall into place. And we're waiting with hope. Or maybe we're waiting with dread, and if only one more thing, that's the next shoe to drop. Maybe we're waiting with dread. So whether it's a good waiting, whether it's a bad waiting, we're all waiting. And if you're like me, you hate it. We live in a world of microwaves. We live in a world of always-on Wi-Fi. We live in a world that if I hit the button for an app on my phone and it doesn't pop up immediately, I get ticked. We don't wait. But God's promise doesn't come with a timeline. God's plan for us and for the world doesn't come with a timeline. And so we're in this moment. We're in this moment in the church year where we're waiting. This is a pause. Today, the Feast of the Presentation, it's 40 days after Jesus was born. Ceremonially, this is when Mary was ready to go back into the temple for her ritual cleansing and bring Jesus and present Jesus as a baby. And so this is the last act of Christmas today. We had Advent getting ready. We had Christmas when Christ was born. We had Epiphany when the world started to see his light. And then we have today where Jesus is brought into the temple. And people realize that plan is starting to unfold. But even in the church year now, we wait. Because we're wearing white today, but next week we're going to wear green, and we're going to wear green for a long time while we're waiting for Lent and Easter. Because Christmas is done, and Easter hasn't happened, and we sit in this in-between time. and we wait. But we don't wait as people who are just passive. We don't wait as people who hope someone else does the job. We don't wait and twiddle our thumbs. We do the work of waiting. We do the work of being prepared. We do the work of being a Christian. There was an African-American theologian named Howard Thurman, and he wrote a lot. He was a spiritual father of Martin Luther King. He wrote a lot of real thick and dense books where he wrestled with the fact that in his own experience, his people were waiting for God to act. And what was it like to be ready and to be faithful and to be Christian in a world that didn't seem to like him too much? He wrote about that experience, and he wrote about what it means to be prepared. He wrote about what it means to work. He wrote about what it means to wait. And he wrote this poem called The Work of Christmas. And it's not a Christmas poem, because in this poem, Christmas is over with. And in our lives, Christmas is over. It's February. If you haven't put your Christmas decorations up, I'm sorry. Just wait till next year. Save them up there for 10 more months. But we've packed up and we've moved on. And we're in this in-between. But the work of Christmas is what Thurman's talking about. So I want to close with this. When the song of the angels is stilled, when the star in the sky is gone, when the kings and princes return to their home, when the shepherds are back with their flock, the work of Christmas begins. To find the lost, to heal the broken, to feed the hungry, to release the prisoner, to rebuild the nations, to bring peace among others, to make music in the heart. So Thurman writes about this experience we all know when the joy and the hoopla and the momentum and everything else seems to be gone, and we're just stuck in that moment where we're waiting for God to act. We're waiting for God to show up, and we think nothing is ever going to happen. In those moments of waiting, we have work to do. And the work of waiting is finding the lost, healing the broken, feeding the hungry, releasing the prisoner, rebuilding the nations, bringing peace among others. The work of waiting is making music in the heart. And so in these times when we feel stuck in the middle, in these times where we're waiting for the next thing to happen, in these times when we don't know what comes next, we wait. And we wait. And we wait. But we don't just sit idly by. We do that work. We show up. And we wait so that on that day, like these scouts down here, we can be prepared. Amen.